Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. The grand hall of the Forrester estate lustered under the golden chandeliers, casting a warm, opulent gleam over the guests gathered for what was supposed to be the most indelible engagement form of the time. Taylor Hayes, radiant in a champagne-colored gown that hugged her figure in all the right places, gripped Deacon Sharp's hand with a mix of expectation and nervous excitement, her heart racing as she prepared to make history in the eyes of the fashion nobility and the Forrester family likewise. Cleric, debonair and attractive as ever, smiled down at her, his eyes twinkling with mischief, charm, and a hint of commodity darker that no bone dared to question in the midst of festivity. The guests, a blend of Forrester family members, contrivers, longtime musketeers, and socialites, buzzed with excitement, their spectacles chinking in expectation of a toast, ignorant that the night would take a terrible turn that no bone could have provisioned. Steffy Forrester, dressed in black despite the summer warmth, stood quietly in the corner, her face pale and drawn, her usual fiery confidence replaced by a heavy, crushing grief that pressed down on her casket. She had entered the news only hours before. Her mama, the insuperable Taylor Hayes, her gemstone in every sense, had passed down suddenly, leaving her shattered and alone in a world that suddenly felt unbearably concave. She had tried to mask her pain for the sake of appearances, to maintain the staid countenance anticipated of a Forrester, but every laugh, every toast, every cheer for Taylor and Deacon's engagement picked her like 1,000 shanks, a cruel memorial of the woman who was gone, the mama whose guidance, love, and horselaugh she'd no way hear again. The form began as planned, with flowing champagne, strictly arranged flowers in color and cream tinges, and a live quintet that filled the room with soft, romantic warbles. Taylor, the center of attention, sounded to radiate joy, her elegant posture commanding the room as Deacon rumored words of love and pledges in her observance, their grins blindingly bright against the darkness that had taken root in Steffy's heart. But beneath the veneer of fineness, commodity minatory was brewing. The pressure between Deacon and certain family members, whispers of once backstabbings and undetermined grievances, and the palpable apprehension of those who tasted that Deacon's charm frequently masked peril, began to ripple through the room like an unnoticeable storm pall. The engagement toast, intended to be the zenith of the night, erupted in applause, yet the echoing clinks of spectacles did nothing to pierce the robe of anguish that enveloped Steffy, who set up herself retreating further into herself, clinging a delicate handkerchief to dab at her eyes, her mind consumed with recollections of her mama's warm grasp, her soothing words, the way Taylor had always been the anchor in her tumultuous life. Also, the night descended into chaos. An unforeseen laugh pierced the music, a high, piercing cry that cut through the jocund chatter like a cutter, and all eyes turned toward the source of the commotion. Guests heaved as they witnessed the horrifying scene. A conflict had broken out near the grand staircase, a collision of old vendettas and impulsive rage, and in the midst of it, a champagne palace had stumbled, shattering glass across the polished marble bottom. Blood glistered in the soft night, mingling with revealed champagne, painting the pristine white scenery in stripes of shocking red. Cleric, caught in the middle, tried to intermediate, but in the chaos, someone slipped on the slick bottom, and a woeful accident unfolded in the blink of an eye. The formerly celebratory engagement came a lurid tableau, screams resonating against the walls as guests stumbled, some injured, others firmed in unbelief, their joyful vesture now stained with blood and fear. Steffy, formerly on the edge of emotional collapse, felt as though the macrocosm had conspired to make her grief unsupportable. She sank to the bottom, clinging her head, gashes streaming freely down her face as recollections of her mama, tender and loving, swamped her mind, now ever beyond reach. Taylor and Deacon, in the center of what should have been their moment of bliss, were adjoined by chaos, their expressions morphing from pride to terror as they realized that the festivity had turned into an agony that could no way be undone. Exigency lights flitted as attendants tried to restore order, voices crying, medical labor force rushing, yet the atmosphere was irrevocably tainted, the golden chandeliers now reflecting the sanguine chaos below. Tales of curses and ill foreshadowings began circulating among the guests, who, despite their social poise, couldn't hide the horror etched on their faces. Steffy, pulsing and slightly conscious of her surroundings, felt the weight of the tragedy press down harder, her mama's death juxtaposed against the horrible spectacle before her, a cruel testament to the unpredictability of life and the fragility of happiness. In that moment, all the pomp, all the fineness, all the precisely curated appearances melted down, leaving only raw, undressed emotion, fear, grief, shock, and despair, submerging the grand hall and consuming everyone in its path. And as the night wore on, with paramedics attending to the injured, guests blubbing or in stupefied silence, and Taylor and Deacon clinging each other amidst the chaos, Steffy remained huddled in the corner, her world fractured, her heart paining with a grief so profound it hovered to gulf her entirely, realizing that some tragedies cannot be soothed, some losses cannot be eased, and some fests, no matter how strictly planned, can helical into horrors beyond imagination. The mingling of festivity and catastrophe, love and bloodshed, joy and mourning, had created a shade of mortal emotion so pictorial, so raw, that it would hang every attendee for times to come, a night ever etched into the history of the Forrester heritage as the night when Taylor and Deacon's engagement came an indelible tragedy, and Steffy Forrester, left to mourn the irreplaceable presence of her mama, would carry that anguish into the deepest corners of her soul, a testament to the cruel, changeable twists of life and the heart-wrenching cost of love and loss intertwined in the most ruinous of ways. The fate saw the grand hall converted from a lamp of festivity to a scene of chaos and tragedy, with broken glass glinting under the dim exigency lights, the scent of blood and revealed champagne moping in the air, and every guest scuffling with their own shock and horror. Taylor, generally so composed, now visibly shaken, cleaved to cleric with a blend of unbelief and fear, while Deacon's fascinating facade cracked under the weight of the night's horrors, revealing the vulnerability and mortal fragility that indeed the most confident can witness when brazened with willful tragedy. Steffy, meanwhile, sat motionless, the world around her blurred, consumed by recollections of horselaugh, guidance, and love now lost, the grief pressing down like an unyielding force, hanging to crush the veritably substance of who she was. The scene came a portrayal of mortal vulnerability, a memorial that joy can be transitory, that life's darkest moments frequently arrive without warning, and that indeed amidst wealth, status, and social majesty, the raw, willful rudiments of tragedy can strike, leaving scars that cannot be cancelled. Musketeers and family tried to comfort each other, yet the night had ever changed them. The Forrester estate, once a symbol of glamour and festivity, now stood as a stark testament to fragility, anguish, and the changeable atrocity of fate. Amid the enchantresses and hushed heartbreaks, amid the chaos of medical labor force and frantic calls, amid the shattered fests, one verity remained: necessary grief and tragedy, intertwined with mortal ambition and desire, could erupt at any moment, turning dreams into agonies, and in the eye of that storm, Steffy mourned, her mama's absence a painful void, a stark discrepancy to the blood-stained spectacle of Taylor and Deacon's engagement, a night where love and horror collided. Leaving no soul untouched, no heart unscarred, and no memory untainted by the cruel twist of fate that had converted a festivity into a catastrophe, ever altering the course of the Forrester family saga and bedding a haunting, indelible tragedy into the lives of all who bore substantiation, a night that would be flashed back not for the pledge of love but for the shattering memorial of life's unpredictability, of how fleetly joy can turn to anguish, and how in the shadow of loss, one can truly understand the depths of mortal pain and the implacable power of grief. And as dawn approached, with the first shafts of light illuminating the chaos of the former night, the guests departed in silence, each carrying fractions of horror and heartache with them, while Steffy remained, alone amidst the wreckage of festivity and tragedy, her mama's absence more pronounced than ever, her heart heavy, her gashes endless, and her soul pronounced ever by the indelible, bloody spectacle of Taylor and Deacon's engagement formed gone horribly wrong, a night where the fragility of life and the brutality of fate revealed themselves in the most unbelievable, indelible fashion, leaving nothing but grief, shock, and a haunting emptiness that would loiter in the Forrester estate long after the last guest had gone, long after the echoes of riots had faded, and long after the memory of her mama's love came both a solace and a torment in the heart of a son who had lost everything she held dear in one night of unmitigated tragedy. The morning after the disastrous engagement actualized cold and implacable, the sun streaming through the grand windows of the Forrester estate doing little to warm the bite that had settled over the formerly celebratory halls. The estate, typically a lamp of glamour, fashion, and social fests, now recalled a tomb of shattered visions, the scent of moping chaos, a blend of antiseptic, revealed champagne, and iron-pigmented blood, hanging heavily in the air. Steffy Forrester had spent the entire night wandering through the corridors, erratically moving from room to room, her eyes vacant, her mind replaying every terrible moment of the former night like a broken film roll that refused to stop. Each memory cut deeper than the last, the flashing chandeliers now smeared with shards of broken glass, the alarmed guests pressed against walls, the frantic whoops of paramedics, and the way Taylor, formerly so composed, had cleaved to Cleric with a blend of terror and unbelief, their joyful grins ever lost in the murk of blood and fear. Steffy's casket pained with a grief so profound it felt nearly physical, a weight that pressed her down into the polished marble bottoms of the main hall, as if the house itself honored her anguish and imaged it back in cold silence. She sank to her knees near the stumbled remains of the Champagne Palace, her fritters brushing over the jagged edges, her gashes falling freely onto the revealed, sticky liquid that now sounded like a cruel conceit for her own life, broken, chaotic, insolvable to restore. Around her, the remnants of last night's horror lay scattered, untouched. Chairpersons had been capsized in the scramble, precious flowery arrangements lay crushed, their petals darkened and drenched, and the crippled glass glistered under the early sun, a silent evidence to the night's violence. Steffy couldn't escape the memory of the laugh that had pierced the room, the cry that had marked the precise moment when festivity had turned to agony, the sound still ringing in her cognizance like a haunting chorus she couldn't shake. She could feel her mama's presence far and wide in that estate, not as a comforting spirit, but as an paining void, the absence screaming louder than any chaos. She had lost Taylor, the woman who had guided her through every storm, and now, in the fate of the catastrophe, the loss sounded to expand, consuming every corner of her heart and leaving a cavernous emptiness before. Deacon Sharp, meanwhile, had retreated to a quiet study, slamming the door behind him with a force that rattled the fragile glass of the girding windows. Typically so confident, so composed, so able of fascinating the world around him, he now set up himself brazened with a reality that no charm could navigate. Taylor, his fiancée, was pulsing in the fate of violence and bloodshed, her generally steady hands shaking uncontrollably as she rumored solace to him that neither of them truly believed. The engagement that had promised love, joy, and social admiration now felt like a fragile, threadbare vision, its thread dangerously rasping with every flash of memory from the former night. Deacon pressed his wind to his forepart, the weight of responsibility, fear, and guilt pressing down on him. He'd always lived a life of calculated pitfalls, of charm and manipulation, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of mortal fragility exposed in similar raw, violent fashion, nothing could have prepared him for Steffy's grief, or for the blood that now marked the threshold of his love story. Taylor, in her own private room, sat with knees drawn to her casket, gaping at nothing, her mind unfit to attune the horror of the night with the poised, perfect life she had imagined. Her maternal instincts, her nurturing instincts, screamed for Steffy's comfort, but Steffy was distant, unobtainable, her anguish like an ocean between them, and Taylor felt helpless, unfit to soothe the pain that had converted her son into someone she slightly honored. Outside the estate, news of the disastrous engagement had spread like campfire, with whispers and rumors percolating through the fashion world and social circles, some framed with horror, others with judgment, all pointing to one inarguable fact: a festivity meant to unite had rather fractured lives, leaving injuries both visible and unnoticeable. Steffy, insulated in her grief, felt the weight of public scrutiny indeed as her private world collapsed. Musketeers and associates transferred dispatches of condolences and concern, yet their words felt concave, as if no bare rulings could pierce the depth of her pain. She couldn't bring herself to respond. Rather, she moved mechanically through the day, stepping through the estate like a ghost, sometimes breaking to touch a scrap of what had been, an capsized president, a crushed rose, a smirch of blood on the marble, and each touch reignited the trauma, forcing her back into the suffocating curl of grief that had overhauled her heart. The Forrester family, formerly fractured by their own internal pressures, plotted to give comfort without aggravating the situation. Ridge, always defensive of Steffy yet so frequently distant in matters of emotional expression, paced the halls, his hands running through his hair, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and fear. He wanted to soothe her, to remind her that Taylor's spirit lived on in her, that the love she had known couldn't be destroyed by death or disaster, but he set up himself paralyzed by the enormity of her grief. Brooke, meanwhile, tried to offer words of consolation, but every syllable felt shy, every attempt at consolation brushing against Steffy's wall of pain, bouncing off without making an impact. Indeed, Finn, who had always been Steffy's anchor in turbulent times, plotted to find the right words, the right gestures, the right touch to access the deep, unyielding anguish that had settled into her bones. As the hours stretched into days, the memory of the bloody engagement form continued to hang every moment, every discussion, every regard. The estate, formerly filled with horselaugh, music, and the warm gleam of social majesty, had taken on an endless shadow, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the violence, the grief, and the chaos, brooding monuments of mortal fragility at every turn. Steffy spent long ages alone in her room, gaping out the window at the auditoriums below, where the morning sun reflected in driblets of dew that glistered like fragile gashes on rose petals. She imagined her mama walking among those flowers, tending them with care and perfection, brooding words of stimulant and love that now was only in memory. Her grief was grim, a storm without reprieve, and it sounded to consolidate with every commerce, every memorial of what had been lost, every reflection on the chaos of the night ahead. Cleric, trying to maintain countenance for Taylor's sake, set up himself decreasingly perverse, haunted, and detracted. He replayed every moment of the night, trying to pinpoint where the festivity had gone wrong, wondering if there had been commodity he could have done, some action he could have taken to help the tragedy. Yet the verity was stark and unyielding. Life was changeable, and occasionally indeed the most precisely planned events entwined into horror, leaving innocence, joy, and grief entwined in an involved web too complex to untangle. Taylor, seeing the growing pressure, tried to bridge the ocean between them, trying to offer comfort, but both were sorrowfully apprehensive that the night's events had altered their reality permanently. Their engagement, once a symbol of stopgap and passion, now felt like a fragile glass garnishment teetering on the edge of destruction, susceptible to every earthquake of fear and grief that percolated the estate. Steffy's grief didn't live in insulation. Guests who had witnessed the catastrophe were agonized with their own guilt, horror, and shock. The social nobility, unaccustomed to defying raw mortal trauma, plotted to attune their curated lives of perfection with the violent chaos they had witnessed. Murmurs and whispers circulated, some directed at Deacon's history, some at the Forrester family's capability, or incapability, to manage their own, and all refocused toward a disturbing verity. Indeed, wealth, status, and precisely constructed appearances couldn't shield anyone from the unpredictability of mortal suffering. The media, nippy to seize upon reproach, began circulating images and stories that only strengthened the Forrester family's collaborative grief, painting the night as a grotesque spectacle, a mix of horror and tragedy, further segregating Steffy from the world she had formerly known. Days turned into weeks, yet the estate remained a geography of mourning, both figuratively and literally. The formerly vibrant halls were silent, the echoes of horselaugh replaced by the quiet hum of memory and remorse. Steffy moved through it all like a shadow, her relations with Taylor and Deacon fraught with pressure, her grief forming unnoticeable walls she could not, or would not, breach. The engagement, laid over indefinitely, dallied as a bitter memorial of lost joy and fragile mortal bid. Taylor, herself visited by her son's anguish and the tragedy of the event, plotted to maintain any semblance of normality, her motherly instinct warring with the fear that her presence couldn't heal the injuries Steffy now carried so heavily. Deacon oscillated between attempts to assert control and the creeping consummation that some effects were beyond control, that grief and tragedy couldn't always be negotiated or managed, only endured. Steffy's mourning came in each consuming force, her days structured around her recollections of her mama, her nights visited by replayed fancies of blood-barred festivity, screams echoing endlessly. She couldn't sleep, she couldn't eat. Exchanges felt alien, indeed music, which had formerly soothed her, now grated on her jitters, a cruel memorial of the air of happiness that had been shattered. Musketeers and family oscillated between concern and helplessness, offering advice, love, and guidance, yet chancing themselves rebuffed, ignored, or veered, as if Steffy's grief had formed a force field through which no external comfort could access. Every regard at a snap, every tale of Taylor's name, every object associated with the former night's events reignited a surge of anguish, grief, and inconsolable mourning. Indeed, as the estate sluggishly returned to a superficial order, the cabinetwork rearranged, the glass removed, the flowery debris swept down, the scars remained. The emotional wreckage, the cerebral trauma, the ever-present shadow of violence and grief had bedded themselves deeply into the Forrester family heritage. Steffy's life, once a shade of ambition, love, and domestic warmth, now revolved around the shadow of loss, an unbroken thread of mourning that refused to fray. In quiet moments, Steffy would retreat to the theater, sitting beneath the roses her mama had formerly tended, allowing the sun to play across her face, yet no way truly feeling its warmth. She rumored Taylor's name into the wind, seeking solace, seeking answers, seeking comfort that couldn't come, and set up only the echo of her own grief returning in kind. Meanwhile, the world outside continued its grim march, indifferent to particular tragedy, yet Steffy remained locked in her own private hell, each twinkle a memorial of absence, each breath a struggle against the suffocating weight of anguish that had come her actuality. And so, the Forrester estate, once a symbol of wealth, beauty, and festivity, came